That's the last of me magnetic disk space gone. Rubbishy newfangled editing programs. Hang on, me microphone's on the blink. Ah, that's better.
This is Missing Episodes podcast calling Something Who. Something Who, can you hear me?
Something Who here? I can hear you, Missing Episodes. Go away.
What? Now listen. This is Tim Burrows, commander of the TV Reviews podcast division. Give me your Apple Podcasts identity registration.
Oh, come on, Commander. I lost that thing about 30 years ago. Why don't you go about your business and leave me alone?
Here's his DWAS registration, Tim. He's a real old-timer. He's been a card-carrying fan for about 40 years.
Richard Smith. I might have known.
You know him, Tim?
Of him? Out on Gallifrey Base, where I did my first tour, he popped up from time to time. Have you ever run across any of these old-timers?
Oh, not from the dark times.
They think they're a law unto themselves. They don't like us either.
Why?
Well, these old-time fans like Richard were some of the first to go out into deep fandom. For a time they had the place to themselves, going to conventions and comic marts, writing the fanzines, stamping each other's addressed envelopes. They're a wild breed, Paul, and they learned to live without a concept of canon.
And then the internet came along and anyone could be a fan, right?
Yes, even these two.
Oi, I've been a fan forever. How come we don't get proper parts in this sketch?
Doesn't bother me. Gives us more time to chat about the James Webb Space Telescope.
Yun! I considered watching more Gordon Gostelow because I want to know what he sounds
What
like.
else has he ever done?
I mean,
Australian, yeah.
So I gather that would explain.
Well,
or would
something.
It? Anyway,
some sources say Australian and some say New Zealand.
New Zealand. His obituary rather snarkily says everybody says Australia, but actually, I think you'll find.
Hello, and welcome to the podcast where we take something old, a Doctor Who story from the original series, compare it with something new, one from the new series, and add something borrowed, that sketch, to make Something Who. Yes, it's Something Who podcast, episode 55. I'm Richard, and we're back to discuss a couple of piratical Doctor Who stories. First, we'll take a look at second Doctor story, The Space Pirates, from season 6. And after that, we'll chew over the 11th Doctor story, The Curse of the Black Spot, from Series 6. And with me to demonstrate that they know their R's from their elbows, we have both hosts of the Missing Episodes podcast, Paul.
Hello.
Yeah, hi. And special guest, Tim.
Ah!
And also joining us, we have science and astronomy writer, Giles.
Is it ham night yet?
And we have graphic designer and Dalek expert, Gav.
Happy New Year!
Hooray.
Hey.
Oh, I wish I'd said Happy New Year.
When's the cut-off, Tim?
A neighbour wished me a Happy New Year this morning, and I lectured them on the cut-off.
I've still got my Christmas decorations up. Can I have a lecture, please? I put them up so late that I thought, sure, it's a movable feast like Easter. I mean, if you put them up really late, you can keep them up late. Isn't that how it works?
Yes.
That works
Just
in
leave
my
them up all
house.
year round.
Well, maybe I do.
Well, if anyone lectures you on it, maybe just claim you're Eastern Orthodox or something. So,
Okay.
so you only had Christmas on the 6th.
I wasn't
even
expecting
that's
to need
a
a
bit late.
legally binding get-out clause, but yeah, I'll try it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's kick off then with The Space Pirates, written by Robert Holmes and directed by Michael Hart. Tim, you wanted to get in quick with your fact.
I did, and I'll tell you exactly why, because I last appeared on this podcast for the Gunfighters, and the most amazing fact that I had uncovered was that the director of the Gunfighters, Rex Tucker, was the father of Jane Tucker out of Rod, Jane and Freddie. And that bloody Giles gazumped me. I think it was Giles.
Ah, was it?
I think so. I've hated you for it since, so if it was Richard, I apologise. So I wanted to get in my director fact, which I stumbled upon on the interweb.
Right.
Which is Michael Hart, whose only directorial appearance for Doctor Who was the Space Pirates, was the brother of Tony Hart.
Wow.
Oh, Lord.
Of Heartbeat.
That's amazing.
Oh, Mr. Hart!
Yeah.
my
So
Colin Bennett
we'll take heart from that fact.
And
nice one.
yeah. And that's all I have to say about the Space Pirates.
Bye.
Now I'm trying to imagine Michael Hart trying to concentrate on his directing job on his Technically Complex program while a little plasticine man is jumping up and down out of the corner of his vision, annoying him.
Did he direct all the morph sequences?
Yeah, they're much like Ridley and Tony Scott. They have that sort of symbiotic relationship.
It's got a rotten reputation, hasn't it, the Space Pirates?
Well, it does.
Normally, in any 5 fans, you can at least 4 of them are guaranteed to hate it. Any random grouping.
I think as an opening gambit from me, I'd say I think it's one of those stories that doesn't easily yield to a synopsis. And I think for years, it was one of those stories where all we had was a synopsis. So before the audios came out, before you could see that one orphaned episode, which doesn't necessarily show it off to its best. It was a synopsis that was kind of confusing because, either you kind of throw the surprise elements into the synopsis, in which case it just, you haven't had enough of a twist one way to see it as a twist another, or it's just very confusing because there's too many minor characters and there's a lot going on. So yeah, I think it's a story that's hard to get a handle on from a few lines.
Well, from my point of view, I never read the Target book.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. I just never did. And my first encounter with the Space Pirates was episode 2 on the Troughton years in 1990-ish. Mm-hmm. And episode 2 is a bit of a strange beast, and I think it really is similar to Enemy of the World 3 in the way it probably misrepresents the story as a whole, and in this case more dramatically, I think. Because in episode 2, you have the heroes trapped in a small set for 25... Well, it's not 25 minutes because they don't come into it for about 7 minutes.
Yeah.
And they're talking amongst themselves for the amount that they're in that episode. And by the way, I don't think they split up for the entire story.
Interesting.
Is that the only Doctor Who story where the Doctor and the companions are in every scene together? Oh, well, no, they do split up, actually, just a little bit, where the Doctor gets ahead of them when going to the Liz 79.
Yes.
But that is the only micro bit, because the resolution to the cliffhanger for episode 5.
Okay.
Yes, at the start of episode 6, they quickly catch up with him.
Yeah.
But
if this had been the Crotons, I would have said that was a mark of it being a story that was written for a different format and then adapted to Doctor Who, i.e. a story that originally had one hero and the writer hurriedly had to replace that with 3 characters.
Yeah.
But it isn't, is it? It was apparently written especially for Doctor Who, so there's no explanation for that. Carry on.
Yeah. So in episode 2, you've got this strange setup where you've got the 3 heroes trapped in a room.
Yeah.
And then you've got the introduction of Milo Clancy, but this is supposed to be a pirate story. And Milo Clancy is very obviously a cowboy.
Yeah.
So that's slightly jarring in your expectations of watching some piracy. And going back to the Enemy of the World 3, he's the comedy character, and you get an offbeat, weird comedy character in Griff the Chef. So it's slightly similar there.
Yeah.
And then the rest of episode 2 is long scenes of General Hermack and Major Warn, who seem to be acting like they're both in completely separate productions from the Space Pirates and from each other.
Yes.
There's some awkward space words going on, which I held against Robert Holmes for a while. You know, like he's likely to explode like glycerol trinitrate and so on. And there's awkward space words when you start getting into episode 1. And then so you've got this very odd single episode with long airs in it, with no interaction between sets of characters. And then when you expose yourself to more of the story, episode 1, well, you've got piracy in it, and that's good. You've got, thankfully, we've got some nice model work, and I think that's rather pleasing. Yeah. But you've got Hermack again and Warn in these painful-ish long scenes of exposition. I mean, for God's sake, you've got literally 2 minutes worth of Hermack expositing by the cunning ruse of an announcement to his crew. And it's all slightly too long. But, and also in episode 1, the TARDIS regulars don't turn up for like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I suspect that the structure of episodes 1 and 2 may be a byproduct of the fact that it was originally a 4-parter.
Exactly.
Aha.
Exactly. The story outline, I believe, was originally due to be a 4-parter, and what we end up with is Terrance Dicks's Dogleg, don't we? We end up with Derek Sherwin, but Terrance Dicks talks about it a lot. He's talked about Dogleg.
Oh, sorry. I thought you meant the script editor for this story.
No, but you know, Terrance Dicks' term, the Dogleg. So you end up with this 2-episode introduction, which is long and drawn out and has got tons of exposition in it. But by the time, but here's the twist: I quite like the world building, and I quite like the sense of space, and I quite like the sense of patience that you have to have while they go from A to B. And then when you get into episode 3 and beyond, and the Doctor and Jamie and Zoe start interacting with first Milo, and then thankfully finally get to Tar, you get a nice Doctor Who adventure. And a few twists, and some interactions, and a few mysteries, and a bit of fun room escaping, and
you
so on and so
finally start to believe that Robert Holmes may have come within spitting distance of this script.
Yeah. And so my very long ramble slagging off episodes 1 and 2 is basically to say it's not his fault. There was turmoil behind the scenes. They were struggling for scripts. He had to extend his original script idea by a couple of episodes. That was badly done and immaturely done, I would say. And then it becomes quite good. And that's my opening gambit anyway.
Hearing you say tar in your fruity tones just made me wish there'd been a Jolly Jack Tar joke somewhere in, or I don't know. But, you know, as it doesn't play on the piracy theme at all, really. It doesn't have any fun with it, does it? Not for the last time tonight.
Interesting couple of things. You mentioned Milo Clancy's quite clearly a cowboy. I gather Robert Holmes wanted to write a space western. And I don't know at what point it was rebranded as Space Pirates. There are a few bits of space piracy crowbarred in, but only very minor. There's a reference to, I think the Doctor says, should we not parley? And there's a few bits of shipping terminology chucked in for good measure, berthing the ships. But by and large, it's a Wild West story, isn't it? It's the gold rush. It's miners.
It's wagon train in space.
Wagon train to the stars, one might say.
There's also the disguising of the pirate ships, isn't there? With the nose cone.
Yes.
But in a naval pirate thing.
I can't believe I hadn't spotted that.
They'd be, running a different flag at the mast.
It's this brilliant piece of exposition. It would be even more brilliant if it hadn't been completely accidental. I mean, if Madeline Isigri had been desperate to say to him, "Oh, and look, here's this. Our ships all look like this," but no, he sort of discovers that by accident. But then it turns out to be a highly important ruse later on. It's slightly odd.
One of my big notes, agreeing with you, Tim, on the world building, and for all its faults in its first episode and its second, I do like Robert Holmes peppering his scripts with these notions of a bigger universe outside the four walls of that studio set. Whilst the big info dump, General Hermack's announcement, is fairly indefensible as a piece of dramatic writing, it is the episode's equivalent of, I would be tempted to say an opening narration, but I would suggest a yellow font crawl into the background telling you the status quo of the galaxy as it stands. And I love the fact that however badly it's done, we are presented relatively quickly with the situation, and we learn about New Sarum and its lost beacon. I like the dialogue between the pirates as well, where they establish that the brushfire wars being fought in 3 sectors are keeping the Space Corps busy, and that's allowed piracy to flourish. And these details create a sense of depth to this galactic world that Holmes has created. And he loves to do this, and he does it in his synopses, endlessly filling in irrelevant detail that never makes it into the script.
He does.
I like the fact that when he talks about the planet Tar, he says that it's exposed to so much ultraviolet light that you can't get life on the surface, which is why all the bases are underground. Oh, and he talks about the fact that he establishes there's a market for Argonite in Region Magnum, and none of these names are important. And it has that Star Wars feel of all these places might come back in further serials down the line if Space Pirates revisited.
The other Star Wars similarity I noticed was and quite enjoyable is the used future dysfunctionality of Milo's ship.
Yeah. When, spoiler alert, I presume we can get into spoilers. I mean, it's only for 60 years, isn't it? When they discover Dom Isigri and Milo and Dom start to reminisce, it has that whole Han Solo and Lando reminiscing over the Millennium Falcon vibe. They talk about old times and old space adventures. And there's even a reference to the fastest journey they achieved, the Space Pirates equivalent of the Kessel Run, gets mentioned. So there's these nice little things. There is a lot that reminded me of Star Wars. There's a lot that reminded me of Star Trek, and it's obviously a decade ahead of Star Wars. Yeah. It's particularly with the V-ship going overhead. That
of course,
massive
I was just about to mention that
opening shot of the V-ship. I mean, that model work is better than some of the stuff attempted 10 years later in Doctor Who. But the Star Trek stuff as well. Star Trek hadn't aired in the UK at this point. So we didn't have a sort of cultural touchstone for spaceship adventure language that would become common parlance. So I liked General Hermack calling down to the engine room for more power. And just all this stuff that you take for granted with Kirk shouting at Scotty. But of course, that was yet to come on British television screens. And it's preemptive of a lot of space adventure stuff. And it's easy to get complacent and see that it's all kind of a bit passé now. But when it's done first, this wasn't cliched and unimaginative.
Yeah. The thing that makes me think Star Trek as well is, you know how Star Trek brings together a cast of people from different parts of the world in a single crew. And, clearly here we've got General Hermack is from planet Rada. Whereas Ian Warren is clearly a character who comes from a 1960s American sort of action serial. I mean, maybe he's the man from U.N.C.L.E. or something. I don't know quite what he's trying to achieve with that. And meanwhile, Madeline Isigri, she's quite RP, but she's sort of a modern actress. I mean, she reminds me of a performance, I suppose, a bit of Jacqueline Hill, but it's that kind of, she's not quite as stagey as Hermack. And then, of course, as you say, we've got a cowboy as well. So it does make you... I mean, either Michael Hart is deliberately going for saying, look, there's all these different people from all these different places coming together in one story, or the actors were just running wild. I'm not quite sure which it was.
I think you glossed over exactly what Gordon Gostelow brings to the party there. You didn't even is that because he gets a whole... I hope it's because he's going to get an entire segment to himself later on.
You are right. The cast, or some of the cast, I should say, are just playing fast and loose with the material. Certainly Gordon Gostelow, he is as bad as Patrick Troughton for taking a rough approximation of the paragraph on the page and trying to get to the end of a sentence to cue the next actor. That character, as written, is nowhere near as much of a cowboy as it is in the performance. So just things like he adds howdy when he meets General Hermack. He changes performing fleas to jumping grasshoppers.
Brilliant.
All these little things. Oh, and like he says to Zoe, he calls her my little chickabiddy. And just all this stuff, none of that's in the script. He is winging almost all of the cowboy stuff.
Okay.
Which is fascinating.
Of course, because what you expect from an Australian actor brought to England to play a character of uncertain origin.
Oh, and if you thought he says newfangled a few too many times, it is in the script at least once. But then he just liberally scatters it throughout virtually every line of dialogue he's got in reference to the Space Corps. Everything becomes newfangled.
I've always had a soft spot for it because this is one of the episodes I saw in '83 at the BFI NFT retrospective that Jeremy.
They were selling NFTs.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether to make an NFT
in the 1980s.
NFT
Did you get in on the ground floor there?
No, so there was they showed 3 orphan episodes. That was the screening that I went to.
3 awful episodes.
Orphan. It was Abominable 2 and I can't remember what else off the top of my head. Maybe we had Abominable Web and Web 1 and this, which is an interesting mix.
It would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I can only agree. It's a shame that the good stuff is kind of where we run out of, because episode 1 is more or less a retread of episode 2, like a retrospective. So we know we've got a good visual idea of what's going on there, and then just when the story gets interesting, we kind of run out of the visual reference for what's actually going on with it, which is a bit frustrating.
I think that's one of the reasons its reputation suffers, is because it's such a visual story. I mean, episode 1, there's no dialogue for 2 minutes, and it starts with an action set piece of a raid on this thing.
Yeah,
and it's no wonder that people feel kind of alienated from it, because it's all just. I mean, it's not all visual storytelling, as we've established. Some of it is monstrously clumsy textual storytelling, but there's loads of bits which are purely visual set pieces.
Yeah.
The whole of the story is full of amazingly visual stuff. I mean, apart from the model work, thankfully we got the model work from episode 1. But I want to see what the planet Tar looks like in space. The script direction says as the ships close in, we see mountains and craters and all this kind of thing. There's a nice bit in episode 3 where Clancy's menacing the TARDIS crew, and then there's the attack by the ship. And then the whole of episode 3 is just larking around, getting to know the Liz 69. There's the teapot mystery, famously.
Teapot mystery? I was going to say something about the...
Tim knows about the teapot mystery.
I know about the teapot mystery because you've been
Gordon
banging on
Goslow
about it all
improvising
bloody
again?
day.
Gordon Goslow saw the character as a man who drinks a lot of tea and decided to incorporate this.
There's a teapot. There's when the ship goes into full power, whatever it is, the script says there's a sound effect of a teapot smashing.
Okay.
But the script direction says the Doctor catches the teapot and holds it in his hands.
Okay.
All right.
So we need to know. But then it goes on to say that they get the spare teapot. That's another stupid detail. I mean, Robert Holmes just chucking stupid details in for no point. But one of the details is the spare teapot is made of the same metal as the ship is made of, and just like random stuff just amuses me greatly.
I did like I listened to the back half on the soundtrack only. I didn't have time to watch, unfortunately, the recon. But yeah, I did like that moment when clearly the ship is going hell for leather and being shaken around the place, and Zoe is apparently wandering around offering people tea.
As the female comedian should be doing. Are you saying that's not right, Giles? Are you saying that's
no? I like it. But presumably while they're all doing their high speed, everyone lean in the same direction because we're accelerating acting.
It's not the funniest of Holmes scripts, but there are some fun bits in it. There's some nice little lines. I like the little joke, how polite Zoe is, because she says it's rude to point, especially if you've got a gun. And I like the stupid slapstick where the Doctor says to Jamie, "Don't make a noise on the ladder," and then he kicks over a chair and he says, "Well, I wasn't on the ladder." It's nice. There's loads of nice little bits, and Clancy is great and fun and funny.
There's another funny bit where the Doctor's talking about magnets, and he's saying, if you get the opposite poles together, if you get the right poles together, the sections of the spaceship will pull themselves together, and Zoe points out that if you get the same poles together, they'll fly apart and they're doomed. And he just says, "Don't be such a pessimist, Zoe." Just before Paul jumps in, I've just remembered another problem with episode 2 that episode 1 doesn't have. There are no bloody villains in episode 2.
Yes,
well,
yes,
quiet.
yeah.
I was waiting for you to say that.
Episode 1 at least gets
Kevin
the
isn't
piracy
in it.
going.
Yeah.
Anyway, Paul, you were going to say.
That'd be like if Enemy of the World 3 didn't have Salamander in. I mean, so it's actually even worse situation, isn't it, than an enemy?
Half the question of the Space Pirates is who are the villains. So, I mean, you do have Clancy because his allegiance isn't established.
Do you think that's genuinely supposed to be a mystery? And for how long?
It comes and goes. I mean, he's not introduced as a hard villain, but his motivation is uncertain, and then the TARDIS crew become a little bit suspicious of him. So
surely the only possibility, in terms of what we've seen already, is that he's Cavern's boss. He would have to be above, So, which would be a really good reveal, I suppose. It'd be a better reveal if people weren't pointing the finger at him for being the villain. I don't know.
They hold it off until, is it episode 3, where he comes in and rescues, comes into their cell.
Yeah,
and
they're
rescues
still
them.
quite
They
suspicious
kind
of him.
Tantalise it until that point. They leave it hanging there.
I need to ask you some more questions before we finish about exactly who wrote this, because I didn't do any research. I didn't even know for sure that it was pitched as a 4-parter and extended. I mean, I may have read that in the past and then forgotten it again, but certainly that's what I would have assumed from watching it. I mean, I would have. Are we assuming that it was the first few episodes that were padded out rather than the padding being added in throughout, just because that's how it feels? Are we all?
Yeah, that's an assumption.
I think that's a good
know.
assumption, but
I think so.
I also think the rest of it is slightly oddly paced, and that once you have the reveal that Madeleine Isigri is in league with Cavan, they sustain that relationship for about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's oddly paced. It's got a pacing issue throughout, but he's obviously stretched it and pulled it like dough. He's pushed it and pulled it from a 4-parter to a 6-parter.
What I want to know is, I literally want to know who wrote it, because I agree with you all that I've watched this much quicker than last time. We watched it as part of our ongoing Doctor Who marathon, the wife and I, and we got stuck in the Space Pirates for months. It was probably the shock of being back on the recons again after thinking we left them behind. But anyway, you don't want to know about that. I was just fixated all the way through on trying to spot Robert Holmes's fingerprints, trying to see his DNA, trying to see any signs or latching onto any sign, because for a long time it doesn't feel, you can't believe he's had anything to do with this, even less so than the Crotons. But the ideas are good, and the plotting is good, and the characters, the character motivations, interactions, they all have a good reason to be doing what they're doing. All that is solid, as you would expect from Holmes. So even early on, he's got that craftsman-like quality. The big difference is that the dialogue is mostly very weak, and also all of those things I mentioned before are up front. They're all explicit. As you said, there's shocking amounts of exposition. All the lovely... yes, he's got all these lovely little asides to the world building out beyond the screen. But normally they're tossed away so lightly. And I'm wondering, it's partly the dialogue, partly it's being serviced by actors. He's normally extremely lucky with his actors, Holmes, isn't he? And bring out the best in what's there and toss off these little asides, whereas here everything seems more laboured. When you've got Jack May doing that exposition, you just think it's never going to end.
He sounds like he's going to keel over, doesn't he? His lungs are obviously failing as he tries to get to the end of a sentence.
I think people have always thought, the fan way of looking at this is, this is Robert Holmes' second story, and this is the first one that feels a bit... we can see him taking baby steps towards becoming Robert Holmes, because there's a funny character in it. There's a funny cowboy. So we can see this is the start of Holmes doing his... But it's not as simple as that, is it? There are many other signs that he is involved in the structure of this story. But I'm suspicious of the dialogue. Now, is there any possibility, I've come at this the long way, that this expansion from 4 to 6 possibly was written by somebody else? Because I would easily believe that 2/3 of the dialogue here was written by somebody else in a very great hurry.
Yeah. Was Robert Holmes ever young is what I went to ask. I mean, it certainly doesn't ever look it in any of the photos.
I know that editing duties were done by Derek Sherwin. So if you can believe that the components of this that don't feel Holmesian are Sherwinian, then that might answer your question. But the rest you might put down to short deadline, lack of enthusiasm, who knows what. I mean, he was writing this, I gather, in an extraordinary hurry, off the back of the Crotons. So,
but he wrote the Talons of Wing Chiang in an extraordinary hurry, and that's a story which...
Yeah, but he was in creative control completely at that point, and had years of experience on Doctor Who.
The Jack May stuff as well. A lot of that is extraordinarily cliched.
Yes.
I bet you're wondering, Ian, why I've let him go. I've let him go precisely because I think he is in charge of everything.
This is what gets to me. That Holmes never writes like that. He can't really write dialogue that isn't competent. It doesn't always have to be sparkling, and it certainly doesn't always have to be filled with Holmesian double acts and one-liners. But he doesn't write stuff that's this clunky. That's what surprises me.
Paul, I have a question for you.
Yes, please.
You're supposed to be a writer.
Yeah.
As an experienced writer yourself, how would you have had the characters reveal all of this complex world building? I mean, even for God's sake, in episode 1, when the pirates turn up after a long, arduous space journey, when they're on Alpha Beacon, whichever one it is, 4, 1, 2, 7, they decide only when they get in to express the what's he called, the number 2, Dervish.
Yes.
Only at that point does he decide to expose his concerns about the entire enterprise to Gavin. Paul, how would you have done? How would you have revealed all this exposition and world building in a naturalistic way?
I can only really repeat what I said already about what Holmes normally does, which is that he has it all in his head or on his his crib sheet, and for a start you would only put in anything that is all right. You'd split exposition and world building. You put your world building in if it's sparkling and funny, so you probably chuck a bit of that out. If you're talking about exposition, you would only put in as much as you need. You space it out more. You put it in the hands of funny characters if you can, or people say it while they're expressing an emotion, or they express it while they're doing something. They don't just stand with a PowerPoint presentation and sticks.
General Hermack could have done his 3-minute speech on the tannoy, public address system, if he'd been crying and doing jokes. Yeah. That would have worked, wouldn't it?
Juggling. If you're in a movie, the obvious thing to do is to have people on the move, charging down a corridor till you do half the speech as the camera's watching them coming towards you, and then you flip to a different angle. They turn a corner. You carry on. You've got all those sorts of tricks you can do to tighten it up if you're on film, you're editing it. If you're in a studio, then if you're an experienced TV writer and you know that the buck stops with you, you can't rely on the actors and the directors to do it with any pace, so you've got to write the pace in. It is possible that this is naivety from a new writer. I could believe that a lot of these problems come from somebody who's just written the Crotons. The flip side of it is, I can't believe that the person who wrote the Space Pirates goes on to write Spearhead from Space and
very soon afterwards,
and Carnival of Monsters and Terror of the Autons immediately afterwards. It's too big a question for here, but it makes me think, was what I think of the third Doctor, Robert Holmes, in him already, but he just didn't have the confidence to. Nobody'd opened the floodgates. Nobody said he could write like that.
It's interesting that Robert Holmes is the master of the 4-parter, isn't he? Fundamentally, everything that he writes is 4 parts, apart from this one, Talons, and then ultimately the 2 Doctors.
This wasn't supposed to be.
Yes, this would have been another 4-parter, wouldn't it? So clearly that seems to be the natural length of his stories, and the really good one. With the exception of Talons, which, as we've already said, it isn't really a 6-parter. It's a couple of stories tacked together. This one is an outlier, isn't it?
And the only other thing I would say, is that this may go absolutely nowhere, but the story of Holmes that it reminded me of most was Caves of Androzani.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah, because that if you're looking for the Holmes story with the fewest jokes in, and it has humour, it's very, very black humour. But Caves of Androzani is either him doing this again, but with the benefit of experience and getting it right, or this is. What's the alternative? I'm saying this could have been Caves of Androzani if we'd had better actors and direct. Well, no, of course not. But that's another link that shows it's the same person. This is largely a serious piece with villains who are desperate people.
Yes, there's not a lot of shade in them, is there? They are when they're bad, they are bad. Yeah.
But General Hermack, you've got to have a system.
They're not the colourful 70s Holmes villains. The big grunguignol people. These are people down there in the dirt getting there.
I'm not saying Spearhead from Space isn't measurably better in quality, but it's not very funny, Spearhead from Space, either, his next one.
This is true. It is a more gradual progression than I'm pretending it is.
Terror the Autons.
I don't think it's so much of jokes as colour and speed and wit and invention. It's starting to paint on a bigger canvas, to which humour is added as one of the textures.
Holmes already had a CV as long as your arm by this point, though, and he'd been TV writing for about 8 years, so it's not really teething problems, except possibly with the format. You wouldn't say.
It would be absolutely fascinating to see the draft scripts. These are the questions that I always love to have answered, and the only writer we can really get into this properly with is Terry Nation, because we've got his drafts. But wouldn't it be amazing to have all of these drafts?
I'm not so sure, given the timescales, that there would be too many drafts and polishes, and I think that's probably the problem.
You'd be surprised. I mean, they would hand drafts in, and the script editor would generally reprocess them and turn out a rehearsal script in the following week. And depending on the script editor in question and the quality of the original, in the opinion of the script editor, there would be small to wholesale changes. So, yeah, I mean, it may be that it was just rushed through and Derek Sherwin had little or no time to work on it, beefed it up a bit, tweaked a few things. But it would be interesting if he just thought, why is this written with all these jokes in it, and took all of the funny bits out? We just don't know. But maybe Holmes's script was
like Christopher H. Beardman on Meglos or something.
Yeah.
Why is this written with all these jokes in?
I only finished watching this half an hour before we recorded, but I did manage to just cast my eye over Pixley's essay on it, because I didn't want to sound like a thicko. And I did notice that at some point that Sherwin had instructed Holmes to put more Doctor and Jamie and Zoe into episode 4. I mean, for goodness sake, he's only in half of episode 1. He comes in a third of the way through episode 2.
Yeah.
Episode 6 they're only on film because they're off doing...
correct. In episode 6, it's film inserts and audio inserts, and that works pretty well, I think.
It does, I think.
Considering. And if you didn't know on the audio beforehand, you wouldn't know.
There's one tiny bit where Troughton's audio is played in for the conversations with Milo Clancy.
Yes.
And because Costello is playing so fast and loose with his lines, whoever's in charge of pressing play on the tape recorder is really struggling. And there's a bit where the Doctor reacts just a half a second before the thing happens, because Costello is just doing whatever he wants.
He's doing Jimmy Stewart, isn't he? Really?
Yes, he is. Yes,
like Alan Partridge interviewing himself.
Kids, do you love him?
Yes, he's sort of old Jimmy Stewart out of the sort of 1960s westerns, isn't he? Rather than anything else. Yeah.
Anything I can tell you about Gordon Gostow is that he made a career out of playing the character of Bardolph from Henry IV parts 1, 2, and Henry V.
Oh, right.
Yes, I don't know. Mostly because he had a weird nose, and it's an allegedly humorous part. I think he does it in The Age of Kings, the 60s BBC Shakespeare soap, and on stage, and again for the BBC in the 70s, 80s. versions.
Does he go for any interesting accent choices there?
Not that I remember. I think he does rural. I think he does sort of Mummerset. From what I remember. Don't quote me on that. But I mean, he can do the classics, so you'd think he'd be able to stick to a script, but maybe he didn't think the Space Pirates was worthy of the time it would take.
Who's the actor who barely showed up as Dominic Segree?
Esmond
Knight?
Larby?
Yeah. He's
yeah, that's what I was going to. Yes.
He's a big deal, isn't he?
He's Shakespearean, isn't he? Didn't he do Henry, one of the Henrys? So many Henrys.
He had Shakespearean eyebrows, and judging by the pictures.
Cut that bit.
There's a fantastic picture of his Henry V on his Wikipedia page, where there's bristles going all over the place. Wild eyebrows, wild tash.
So I'm right. He did a Henry.
He did. He did a Henry.
It's back in again.
It's back in again. De-edit that bit, Richard. Edit it backwards so you hear me saying not to edit it first, and then good story for Zoe.
Yeah, and there's a really neat bit in episode 3 where she shows her astrophysics prowess and does all the calculations. A little callback to the Wheel in Space where she was introduced explaining the problems with the silver carrier. That was all very neat. And then there's a lovely little bit of character stuff with her and Troughton. Yeah, really nice.
And a nice bit where she doesn't know how to what candles are.
Oh yes,
which is actually someone paying attention to who this character is meant to be and where they're meant to be from. It's nice to actually get the flip side of the Jamie stuff, which all too often gets ignored.
She did encounter candles previously and not raise a concern though in the Mind Robber.
In the Mind Robber, yes.
Oof.
But isn't it nice that Jamie was brought in and soon his character is forgotten apart from very token jokes throughout. And Victoria is brought in and she's soon dressed as a swinging 60s girl and is just the perils of Pauline. But it's a nice thing, a very nice thing, I think, that with Zoe, just thinking off the top of my head, she retains her essential character traits in the invasion.
Crotons.
The Crotons, for sure. Seeds of Death, not so much maybe, but it comes back in force in this. And she saves the day. And, she produces pages of maths. And it's one of the few instances in classic Doctor Who, I think, where the essential character core is revisited time and time again. It's a very strong effort from her for her character. That was nice.
There is good character stuff in this. I think Cavan is a really good villain.
Very underplayed, and he is
unpleasant.
Unpleasant.
Excellent. I think Madeline is terrific, and I think is a fascinatingly nuanced character because she's aligned with the villains, but rapidly it turns out that she wasn't that keen to get that involved, and then she's coerced into helping. And then she goes through this.
But she wasn't. I thought the obvious thing to do with her was she was coerced into helping because she knew her father was being held hostage. And that isn't the case at all.
No.
In fact, it's a very odd serial because a lot of the characters don't meet. Madeline doesn't meet her father.
No.
Hermac doesn't meet anyone apart from Madeline. You've got all these characters acting in completely different studios.
It's the opposite of Star Wars. Where everyone turns out to be related. Not only meet each other, but they turn out to be nieces, nephews, fathers, sons and grandchildren.
I mean, Hermac only meets poor old, what's-his-face?
Ian.
Oh, no, I didn't mean him. I meant the guy, George, what's-his-face, who's manning the computers.
Oh, the other guy.
George Payton?
Did you say Payton? No.
George Layton.
George Layton, thank you. Yeah, I got Penn. And he only deals with him, Warren. He meets Madeline in episode 2. And that's the only interaction he has.
Well, they do. Milo Clancy wanders onto the bridge.
Oh,
very
Milo,
briefly.
of course, yes. In episode, it all happens in episode 2. Episode 2 is brilliant because Hermac gets to meet other people. Yeah. But for the rest,
it's like
the other
always
5,
said, Tim. Episode 2
There's also
is
that strange
brilliant.
bit where Sorba, you think he's dead, he disappears from the plot for a couple of episodes, he shows back up again, he's injured. They carry him around for a while, then he dies without doing anything more.
Then he does.
So,
Teach him.
Yeah.
Whether that just shows just how cruel life is, or because he had loads of loose ends. It's a bit Eric Say with that. It's sort of Attack of the Cybermen.
I think it says something where the worst episode is the one where Jack May is allowed to interact with other characters.
He's a shocking actor. I just wanted to say that out loud. I wanted to put that on record in case.
There are some quite long scenes in this, aren't there? I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, it doesn't feel overly stagey, except when Jack May's talking, but it does have that construction that some of the scenes do go on for quite a long time. It's not this, there are other stories in this season that are much more rapidly cut than that.
Is that it? Is it fundamentally it? They had to expand it from 4 to 6 in such a hurry, 50% extra material, that rather than adding any extra subplots, they didn't do what they did in the 70s and add an extra 2-part prequel on the beginning or something.
Well,
they just expanded almost every scene, inflated every scene by 50% with extra dull dialogue that nobody had any time to polish.
Maybe, but that means there would be 2 episodes crammed with exposition and then 2 episodes of
unless
plot.
Unless they shifted some of the cliffhangers.
At the risk of buggering up our speculation,
yes.
He says, I'm checking out Shannon Sullivan's site, which kind of conflates an awful lot of stuff from various places, and apparently it was commissioned as a 6-parter from the outset.
Rubbish.
But Holmes would later recall that he originally intended for there to only be 4 episodes. So apparently it was commissioned as 6.
Yes, it certainly wasn't late in the day. It certainly wasn't late
apart.
in the day that it was expanded. It was at storyline level.
Patrick Mulkin on the Radio Times says it was very late in the day. So
presumably. But presumably that would imply it's probably.
Don't tell me the Radio Times is wrong. I mean the bottom of my world has dropped out now.
I meant to check the official Robert Holmes biography by your pal.
Me too.
Molesworth, but I forgot.
Yeah.
So good.
So presumably Holmes would have turned in 6 episodes unless he had help along the way. So he would have been probably expanding and desperately padding his own ideas. I
mean, frankly, that is. Yeah.
I mean, you do get a pretty egregious repetition of the bless the restoration team, who work miracles, but it tries your patience, and they just repeat the same heist sequence about 3 times, don't they? With the don't you get 2 attacks on the space beacons in episode 1 before you get to the
7,
one,
then 4. Yeah.
Yeah, before you get to the one that the Dr. Jamie and Zoe are
I mean,
on. So
this must show
I think we can
how
assume
little
that's why.
This is how little time they had. If you had enough time, you would add 2 more episodes worth of plot somewhere. Because Doctor Who was not above get captured, escape, get captured, escape. We know that you can stretch out a story indefinitely. You would add another planet somewhere. But clearly there wasn't enough time even to plot out 2 episodes, so they just had to expand what they had. This must be the proof.
Or indeed 2 planets. Because the other planet that they have, what's it called, Gav?
Lobos.
Lobos is a red herring.
Yeah.
So they only have
Spend a lot of time
They go
going
to
to
Lobos
Lobos.
and then come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is Milo's planet.
But those last 4 episodes do feel quite full of stuff going on. I mean, it doesn't feel like you kind of...
But we're all being shaded by the shadow. Shaded by the shadow. We're all impressed by episode 2.
It's haunting. And that is, for me, I mean, the fact that it keeps moving, keeps changing location, there's new characters, is what saves it. Because I think if you've got the choice between a dull 6-part story that keeps moving on and a dull 6-part Base Under Siege, which is stuck in one place, then I would much rather have the former. Because at least you've got some novelty. It may be something new boring each week, but...
Yeah,
and I'm not saying
it's
it's
the
all
monster
boring.
of Peladon, is it? It's not, there is incident, and I go back to the point that from episode halfway through episode 3 onwards, it's damn fine. It's good, enjoyable.
I would rather find some more of this than, for example, Wheel in Space. Does that make me a bad person? Have I gone too far there?
I would rather watch this than Wheel in Space. Yeah.
Well, hey.
Certainly, maybe not episode 1.
I mean, I know Tim has particular reasons for wanting to see Wheel in Space, but
no, I absolutely agree. I would much rather see anything than the Wheel in Space. But I'm laughing because Gav is the biggest apologist for both, and asking him to choose.
Oh, I was giving him a Hobson's choice there.
Asking him to choose is yeah.
No, I think
Hobson's
I'd go
choice.
Space Pirates.
Oh.
I mean, because the Wheel in Space.
what a
I mean, we're very lucky with having 3 and 6, and 4 and 5 don't have a huge amount. The only one, like you say, a Wheel in Space, you really want to see episode 1.
yeah.
And there's some interesting stuff in the rest. But what blows my mind with the Space Pirates is how often people say it's boring. And I can only assume they're not getting past episode 2. I mean, I don't have the issues with episodes 1 and 2 that seem to prevail. But I think, fairly objectively, 3, 4, 5 and 6... pretty incident filled, and I do think that it's a result of it being a missing episode that you fail to appreciate how much stuff is going on. I mean, the end of episode 3 and in episode 5 there are laser battles. End of episode 3 you got Zoe spies some stuff shot on film at Ealing with people dismantling their things with the welding torches, and then they have a gunfight, and then they fall down a hole. There's a laser battle in episode 5, but throughout there's this interesting sort of patchwork shifting of genres. I mean, it's ostensibly a pirate story, but it's really a western, but it's actually in space. But then, just in case you're getting bored of that, it suddenly turns into a macabre gothic mystery set in an Edwardian study with a decrepit old bloke who comes crawling out of the woodwork. And I just think it's full of interesting little twists and turns.
Gav, there's so little that exists by way of photographs. It is extremely missing. How do we know about the Edwardian study, apart from the audio clues? I'm genuinely naive on this. There's a grandfather clock or a long case clock.
Yeah.
It's in. What does the script say?
The script says that it's decorated as an Edwardian study.
Right.
And then, of course, you've got the plot point of the 8-day mechanism proves that it's still in use. And Clancy talks about how Dom was an old romantic and had all of these antiques shipped from Earth and all the books.
Does he refer to it as Earth there?
Good question.
Because
Pass. I'd have to look that up. Otherwise, it's home planet. You're right.
Only because I noticed that they only refer to home planet throughout the rest of it, so it was quite a jolt when they said, "Oh, Edwardian." So I thought, okay, it is.
There is a sketch published somewhere of somebody's recollection of the episode, which is quite a nice little pencil doodle of Edwardian drawing room, which is rather nice. But yeah, I mean, that is a weird left turn for no particular reason that I can fathom. I mean, maybe a cost-saving measure, but...
yeah, and suddenly you're dealing with candles and putting wax on a carpet and setting fire to rags, and that's a left turn, isn't it?
It is. It's a left turn into Talons of Weng Chiang, which is where we'd next see an escape routine. I mean, it's also he recycles it partly in Brain of Morbius, lighting stuff so the smoke comes out the ventilation to attract someone to come and unlock the door and then ambush them when they come in. So Space Pirates.
It's also reminded me of the Ice Warriors, where you've got a future Earth scenario and they're raiding the BBC props department to populate a set with old stuff. So the chateau or whatever it is in the Ice Warriors.
Yeah, no, I have no clue as to that. I would believe it if that was just Robert Holmes having a bit of fun, but I could also believe it if somebody said, "What's the absolute cheapest way you could do the next unusual set?" I mean, it's mostly a mystery story. It's a smuggling frontier town vibe half the time, 49ers in the tunnels and that kind of thing. So to have an Edwardian or indeed a Victorian study just doesn't really feel out of place with the likes of Milo Clancy, and I really like that. It's not steampunk, but it's in that weird middle ground of what you'd call ordinary future sci-fi and this kind of blending of styles to do something a little bit more interesting.
Just thinking about this whole thing that the And when do we really start getting space opera kind of stuff in Doctor Who? I'm just thinking back, and I'm thinking, is the Wheel in Space? Is that the first story that really features a lot of spaceship work? Because it's obviously, and this was going out. I was looking at some of the transmission logs online, and I think they were showing clips from Apollo 9, or highlights from Apollo 9 in orbit around the Earth while they were broadcasting.
That's a really interesting point, isn't it?
And obviously, Seat of Death, we always say, well, that's like a bit of a response to.
Which came first in the timeline? Seeds of Death or the Space Pirates?
Seeds, because this is the penultimate story of the
No, I mean in terms of Earth history, human history.
Oh, I see.
Oh, wow.
Well, as Giles just pointed out, they never mention Earth. So, for all we know, these are all aliens. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. I don't know.
And they don't
Seeds
believe
of Death
with Edwardian studies.
is reveling in the space program, isn't it? And it's taking a cockeyed view of the space program and saying, that's all old hat. We're now on T-Mat.
Which was ironically accurate to go to the moon and then not bother again for decades.
And then we have the very next story. Well, forget all that, because we're now in a space age
proper science
empire
fiction universe,
science fiction universe, and the two are quite jarring. I wonder which came first.
Sequentially, sorry, are we talking about within the fictional?
Within the Doctor Who universe?
I think Seeds is meant to come first and imply that that's close to Earth.
It's implausibly close to now, isn't it? That they invent this life-changing transmat.
So why aren't they T-matting everywhere? Why aren't the pirates T-matting from?
They quite explicitly don't believe that technology exists. That's Clancy doesn't believe that Doctor could have materialised his TARDIS inside the beacon. So, but then that's kind of true for every other Doctor Who story ever written afterwards. It's fantastical technology nobody can conceive of.
Does T-Mat need the? I can't remember. God knows, it's so long since I've seen that. Does T-Mat need the transmitter station on the moon and then base stations on Earth?
Yeah, T-Mat's
so
controlled from the moon.
But they both don't feel very in universe with each other, do they?
They don't.
Yeah. Then let's put this way off in the future, along with androids of Tara possibly being one of these degenerate Earth colony civilization type of.
It's like trying to watch Star Trek Discovery and believe that it comes before Captain Kirk, even though they've got 10 times better technology and
tardigrades.
And the Next Generation never happened. Deep Space Nine never happened because these were broadcast back to back. So it's an odd twist in that. Yeah. I think you've got a very competently written Seeds of Death that is what it is. I know it's got its detractors, and I know it's a bit of disposable fun. And then you've got an extremely competently written The War Games, and this bit of an inconsistently paced thing in between, with lots of Jack May throughout.
Jack May, I mean, he's not only not very good, but he ruins the whole ending by fluffing his line. He says one wrong line that makes the nonsense of the entire denouement. So anyone trying to follow the plot based on the names of the spaceships has no chance, because he names the ships wrongly. He says, I've got 12 minutes to launch the beta darts in order to go and get the baddies. What he was meant to say was, I've got 12 minutes to destroy the beta darts, because they are the baddies.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to work out who's got the minnows and who's got the beta darts, and you're listening to him, you've got no chance. Yeah, you can blame him for a lot of things.
Or alternatively, we just imagine he was under stress, and and General Hermack just got the wrong word. He's middle-aged. He's just one of those days.
It's a shame. I like him in Adamant.
You think on paper that episode 6 countdown, where they've got Troughton the Doctor having to defuse the bomb in time, and you've got Shane Warne closing in on, which one is it, Gav? The minnows,
whatever Hermac.
It's oddly lacking in tension. The beta dot. It felt on audio, and we don't have the visuals, so it's unfair. It just felt a little bit oddly lacking in tension there. I think they could have done a bit of a more of a heartbeaty countdown. Because on paper, that's brilliant. That is perfect episode 6 climax. He's got seconds to do it. He defuses the bomb, and there's 007 on the counter or whatever happens in countdown things. Yeah, it's just oddly lacking in tension.
I think the weird thing is when the music stops, because it feels like it's all building up nicely and all of these plot threads are converging into this situation, and the music's building and it's intercutting relatively quickly by Space Pirate standards between these 3 scenes. And then the music just sort of tails off. And then the last 30 seconds of this tension is set to complete silence, and it's bizarre.
Well, maybe it's close-ups of... I don't know, you've got the camera scripts. Is it close-ups of Troughton with sweat dripping off his brow?
Well, now you ask, we don't know. Ooh. Because episode 6, all the regulars are shot on film. And there is no proper camera script for anything. So we don't know what any of the bomb defusion scenes look like at all. It just simply adds to the fascinating conjecture, because we know that when Doctor Who is given the time, far more than the money was important. If they had the time, they could work wonders. You look at the opening sequence of episode 1 of The Web of Fear, which is shot and edited on film, and it looks like a movie. And so that's how all of the regulars were shot for Space Pirate 6. All shot and edited and beautifully lit, one might imagine, on film ahead of time at Ealing, including this tense bomb disposal.
Because they were doing the war games? They were on location for the war games or something?
They had an extra long location allocation for the war games, so they were pre-filming the war games for too long for them to have them in studio for episode 6 of the Space Pirates. As a result, Madeline's role was expanded. She took some of the dialogue that Troughton would have had in conversation with Pirate Man and Milo, I think. Crikey. So her role, I think, was improved. And I think she comes across really, really well. She goes through the emotional ringer, however improbably, discovering her dad's alive and then being threatened with him being killed again. And
they never fire Chekhov's missing estranged father, do they? They never meet.
No.
They meet off camera at the end.
They do fire. And that's Chekhov's ribbons on the ventilation grill, which in our surviving episode 2, you get a nice shot that shows the ribbons on the ventilation grill to show the air conditioning is working, the oxygen's pumping, and then the whole sequence in episode 6 where the oxygen is killed allows the ribbons to go limp to denote that they are all going to die. And then there's a camera script direction that says when the air is reactivated, the ribbons pick up again. And it's nice to know that, knowing that we've got shots of that in episode 2 just flapping away in the background. Beautiful detail.
Well, let's give Michael Hart the benefit of the doubt and assume that the absence of audio is because of tense close-ups of Troughton choosing wires or mopping sweat from his brow to try and defuse the bomb in time. We're never going to see it, so let's just assume that's the case. Can I give a quick shout-out to World War II technology being put into Holmes's script, where the Liz-79 deploys copper needles to distract Shane Warne's radar. That's World War II technology.
It's not quite what happens, but it's close enough. But what's interesting is this must have been so visually interesting because we know the model work was really good, and so they sprinkle these needles out into the cosmos. I want to know what that looked like. So the Liz deploys these needles into space, and then the missile runs into them, and they get magnetized to the hull, and it slows the missile down. And then the minnow runs into the same cloud of needles and they all adhere to its hull. That sounds really tricky and difficult to achieve. And maybe it looked dreadful. I don't know. But it's just fascinating. But also I love the idea, I think you've probably hit the nail on the head, Tim, that's a better explanation. But I thought he was sprinkling nails on the road to let the tyres down. No, the car following.
First of all, I called it World War II, which is my personal pet hate.
What you mean is WW2?
I call it. It should be called the Second World War, and I can't believe I called it World War II. But Operation Window.
Operation Winkle.
Window.
To winkle out
was
the spies.
On the World at War, you've got old Bomber Harris, curmudgeonly and miserable and racist in his chair, defending his slaughter of millions of innocent civilians. But when they bombed Hamburg, by the time they were bombing Hamburg and bombing them back, they would deploy aluminium strips which would disrupt the German radar, or as such that they had at that time, and that was a direct rip-off, which I thought I gave myself a little brownie point for spotting.
Well, I gave myself a brownie point for nails on the road to letting the tyres down, so we both win, really.
We do, in a way. In a way.
One final sort of Star Trek nod also is that the end of episode 6, unaccountably, everyone ends up laughing for about 5 seconds too long, which is a very Star Trek ending. And yet you say that wasn't in general circulation at the time.
No. But I'll tell you something else.
Go on then.
How often did Doctor Who not end with the TARDIS crew not only not leaving in the TARDIS, but basically an additional adventure away from even finding the TARDIS?
Yeah.
I mean,
yes, he could
has
have
Big Finish filled that niche? There's got to be a whole range to have Milo Clancy and the TARDIS crew.
Trying to get
you could have umpteen acres of fun. I mean,
Gordon
the whole of episode 3
has a son
is
who's an actor, so maybe.
Wow, there you go. drop them a note, but make sure I get some kind of payment for that idea. Yeah, it's remarkable that episode ends with them not leaving in the TARDIS. Here we go to do our best to find it, and then unknown period of time elapses before the war games start.
It could have been written by David Whittaker, couldn't it? Because the entire jeopardy of from the Doctor's point of view and Jamie and Zoe's is trying to get back to the TARDIS. You know, and they have that in the wheel in space, and they have it in the first season.
Sprinkling a bit of mercury, and you'd be away, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and a food machine here and that.
Yeah, they're just trying to extricate themselves and go home.
Yeah. Well, they do the opposite of the food machine, where Costello actually eats a boiled egg.
Yeah. So this could be season 6A then, couldn't it? You know, season 6B is after the war games. This is the bit in between, isn't it?
I think we're all getting royalty checks here when we finish cashing in on this.
Yeah.
I was just going to say this would be an ideal point at which to take a break and go off and have an off-screen adventure before we reconvene for the next story.
That's very good.
We'll be back soon with more on the Space Pirates and all of our discussion about Curse of the Black Spot. But in the meantime, here's a clip from my other podcast.
Emily, what's that big pile of foliage doing on your desk?
Oh, that's specially for January. Why do you ask?
Nothing really. It just seems a bit out of place.
New year, new me. Every day I'm going to turn over a new leaf.
I see, I think.
Is that a new high-definition camera you've got, Richard?
Oh, yes, it is. Well spotted.
Any reason for the upgrade?
Well, it's my New Year's resolution.
Oh, dear. That's terrible. Anyway, on with the show.
Hello and welcome to If It's Hurting, It's Not Working.
And if you can believe it, we've reached episode 5 already, which is all about New Year.
So we often like to see the new year as an opportunity for a fresh start.
And that can mean a big change in our lives or some tweaks to make it work better for us.
We're continuing to post material on our webpage, which is ifhurtnot.work. And that's where we've got links to all of our podcast episodes and also links to all of our social media accounts. So it's the one place where you can get to everything that we're doing. New Year, I guess, offers us a good opportunity, both in our lives and in our work, to have a fresh start. And I guess one of the reasons why we find that really useful is because it's easy to get stuck in particular patterns. I've got a couple of New Year's resolutions that I've thought about, and they're both similar in that they're both to do with focus, but they're slightly different in terms of the emphasis.
I don't particularly make New Year's resolutions. I make pledges to myself of things, little things that I want to get done, because life's so busy these days. So I try to pick one that's for myself and then one that's for work. You can go in and still do that. You haven't missed your opportunity where you can just have a little sit down and a think, but just don't procrastinate too much.
Very nicely put.